Everything you think you know about Rome's founding is wrong. No, twin babies weren't raised by a wolf. The truth is far more fascinating, and it explains how a tiny village became the most powerful empire in human history. The city that would rule the ancient world started as nothing more than mud huts on a few hills. Today, we're uncovering the real story of Rome's origins, not just the myths they told themselves centuries later. We'll examine the archaeological evidence, the forgotten people who shaped early Roman culture, and the pivotal decisions that set Rome on its path to domination. The surprising truth reveals exactly why Rome succeeded where countless other ancient settlements failed. When we talk about ancient Rome, we picture grand marble columns, massive amphitheater, and powerful legions conquering the known world. But this creates a massive problem in understanding how Rome actually began. The Romans themselves struggled with this question. By the time they became powerful enough to start recording their own history, centuries had passed since their humble beginnings. The gap needed filling, and humans love a good origin story. This led to the famous myth of Romulus and Remus, twin princes abandoned as babies, rescued and nursed by a she-wolf, who later founded the city. According to legend, on April 21st, 753 BCE, after an argument over where to build their new city, Romulus killed his brother and established Rome, naming it after himself. It's a captivating story that served Rome's later imperial ambitions perfectly. What better foundation myth for a mighty empire than divine twins with royal blood and the blessing of Mars? The problem is, archaeological evidence tells us something completely different. So what actually happened? How did a collection of small farming communities transform into history's most influential empire? And what made this particular spot on the Tiber River so special that it would become the center of the Western world for centuries? Let's start with geography. The site of Rome wasn't chosen randomly. The area provided three critical advantages that ancient settlers couldn't ignore. First, the famous Seven Hills offered natural defense. In an era where conflict between neighboring settlements was constant, having the high ground meant survival. Second, the location sat at a natural crossing point of the Tiber River, which meant anyone traveling north-south through the Italian peninsula had to pass through this area. This strategic position allowed early Romans to control both river travel and land routes. Third, the surrounding countryside was fertile enough to support a growing population. The combination of defensible hills, a navigable river with access to the sea, and productive farmland created the perfect conditions for a settlement to thrive. Archaeological excavations reveal that humans recognized these advantages early. The oldest discovered remains on the Palatine Hill date back to around 1000 BC, nearly 250 years before Rome's legendary founding date. These weren't Romans yet, just scattered villages of Latin-speaking people, building simple huts and farming the land. The hills that would eventually form Rome weren't unified at first. Each had its own small community. The valleys between them were mostly uninhabitable marshland that flooded regularly when the Tiber overflowed. These separate hilltop settlements wouldn't merge into a recognizable city until much later. So who were these early settlers? They belonged to a group called the Latins, not the Romans, not yet. They spoke an early form of Latin and shared cultural connections with other communities throughout central Italy. These proto-Romans lived in oval-shaped huts with thatched roofs. They made pottery by hand, used bronze tools, and buried their dead in simple graves. Their lives centered around farming, raising livestock, and basic crafts. Evidence shows they practiced animistic religious beliefs, seeing divine spirits in natural features like springs, trees, and household objects. They performed rituals at sacred groves and made offerings at outdoor altars. This early religion focused on ensuring good harvests and protecting the community. The earliest settlements clustered on the Palatine Hill, which later became the prestigious neighborhood where emperors built their palaces. From there, communities gradually spread to the other hills, the Aventine City. What's fascinating is that these early inhabitants had no idea they were founding what would become the center of a vast empire. They were simply farmers looking for good land with natural protection, living much like thousands of other small communities across Europe at that time. Now we need to talk about the most overlooked factor in Rome's early development. Modern historians consider them crucial to understanding how Rome transformed from scattered villages into a unified city. The Etruscans were a sophisticated civilization that dominated northern Italy before Rome's rise. They built planned cities with stone walls, complex drainage systems, and monumental architecture. Their artwork was advanced, their metalworking exceptional, and they had a written language. They traded extensively throughout the Mediterranean. Archaeological evidence shows that around the 7th century BCE, Etruscan influence over the Latin settlements that would become Rome increased dramatically. This matches Roman history, saying later kings were Etruscan. Under Etruscan guidance, the separate hilltop villages began their transformation into a true city. The marshy valleys between hills were drained through an engineering marvel, the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's great sewer system that still partially functions today after 2,500 years. The Forum area, once an uninhabitable marsh, became the city's central public space. Temples and public buildings, with distinctive Etruscan architectural elements appeared. The Capitoline Hill emerged as a sacred area, housing Rome's most important temple to Jupiter. From the Etruscans, early Romans adopted their urban planning concepts, advanced building techniques, and religious practices like reading omens from animal entros. Gladiatorial combat, originally an Etruscan funeral ritual, elements of clothing like the toga, the bundled rods with an axe as a symbol of authority. This Etruscan influence fundamentally shaped what Rome would become. Without them, Rome might have remained just another collection of Latin villages. By the 6th century BCE, the separate settlements had grown together into a recognizable city. A sense of shared identity developed among people living on the different hills. Religious festivals, trade, and common defense interests bound these communities together. We know from archaeological findings that substantial walls began to appear, enclosing the growing settlement. Stone buildings replaced wooden structures in key areas. The population grew as rural people from surrounding regions moved to this emerging center. Rome's social structure became increasingly complex during this period. A clear distinction emerged between patricians, who were the aristocratic families, who claimed descent from the original founders, and plebeians, the common citizens. This social division would shape Roman politics for centuries. Family stood at the center of Roman identity. The paterfamilias, the oldest male, held nearly absolute authority over his household, including the power of life and death over family members. This patriarchal structure was mirrored in Roman governance, with kings serving as father figures to the state. By this time, Rome had developed beyond a mere village, but wasn't yet the republic that would eventually conquer the Mediterranean. It was a monarchy, traditionally said to have been ruled by 7 kings. While details about these kings mixed legend with history, archaeological evidence confirms that Rome was indeed governed by monarchs during this formative period. The traditional list of Roman kings includes Romulus, the legendary founder; Numa Pompilius, established religious institutions; Tullus Hostilius, expanded territory through conquest; Ancus Marcius built Rome's first bridge across the Tiber; Tarquinius Priscus, an Etruscan who initiated major public works; Servius Tullius created Rome's first census and class system; Tarquinius Superbus, the proud king whose abuses led to the monarchy's overthrow according to Roman tradition. The monarchy ended dramatically in 509 BCE when the last king, Tarquinius Superbus, was overthrown following his son's rape of a noble woman named Lucretia. While this specific incident may be legendary, archaeological evidence confirms significant political changes around this time. The Romans established a republic, from the Latin res publica, meaning public affair, with power balanced among different institutions, to consuls who served as chief executives, elected annually. The Senate, composed of aristocratic elders who advised magistrates; various assemblies where citizens could vote on laws and elect officials. The Romans became deeply opposed to kingship. The word rex, or king, became almost a curse word in republican politics. This transformation from monarchy to republic was extraordinary for its time, and created a system with checks and balances that would influence later democratic governments. But the early republic faced intense challenges. Externally, Rome battled neighboring peoples like the Volsciaqui and Sabine. Internally, conflict raged between patricians and plebeians over political rights and economic issues, particularly debt bondage. A pivotal moment came in 494 BC, when plebeians conducted the first secessio plebis, literally walking out of the city and refusing to serve in the army until their demands were met. This effective general strike forced patricians to create the office of tribunes of the plebs, with the power to protect common citizens from aristocratic abuse. This ability to resolve internal conflicts through institutional reform rather than civil war became a hallmark of early republican Rome. It allowed the city to focus its energies outward, beginning the long process of expansion through central Italy. By the beginning of the 4th century BCE, Rome had transformed from a collection of hilltop villages into a unified city-state with unique governmental institutions, a growing population, and increasing military power. The foundation was set for its eventual domination of the Mediterranean world. The defining moment in Rome's early development came in 390 BCE. After centuries of gradual growth, Rome faced catastrophe when Gallic warriors from the north sacked the city, burning much of it to the ground. Many ancient settlements throughout history faced similar disasters and never recovered. Cities were abandoned. Civilizations collapsed. But Rome did something different. Instead of retreating, the Romans rebuilt. And not just to the previous state. They emerged stronger. They constructed the massive Servian walls around the entire city. They reorganized their military, developing the manipular legion system that would eventually conquer the Mediterranean. They reformed their governmental institutions to be more resilient. This response to disaster reveals the core characteristics that made Rome exceptional: pragmatism, adaptability, and sheer determination. When faced with defeat, the Romans didn't just persevere. They analyzed what went wrong, made systematic changes, and came back more formidable than before. Within 50 years of this devastating attack, Rome had become the dominant power in central Italy. Within a century, it controlled the entire Italian peninsula. The pattern was set. Rome would face challenges, adapt, overcome, and expand. This pivotal response to crisis transformed Rome from just another Italian city-state into the foundation of what would become an empire. Rome's true origin wasn't a dramatic moment when legendary twins decided to build a city. It was a centuries-long process of gradual development, cultural exchange, and adaptation. What began as simple villages on defensible hills transformed through Etruscan influence into a unified urban center. The overthrow of monarchy created innovative political institutions that balanced power and resolved internal conflicts. And the response to catastrophe demonstrated the resilience and pragmatism that would define Roman civilization. The real story of Rome's beginning teaches us something crucial about how great civilizations form. It's rarely about a single founding moment or one brilliant leader. It's about geographic advantages, combined with cultural openness, institutional flexibility, and the ability to learn from failures. Rome succeeded where countless other ancient settlements failed because it constantly evolved. It borrowed freely from neighbors: the Etruscan urban planning, Greek artistic styles, and technologies from across the Mediterranean. It created governmental systems that could adapt to changing circumstances. And perhaps most importantly, it developed a remarkable ability to incorporate conquered peoples rather than merely subjugating them. This pragmatic approach to growth and governance set Rome apart and explains how a collection of mud huts by a river crossing eventually ruled territories from Britain to Mesopotamia, creating a cultural legacy that continues to shape our world today. The mythical twins nursed by a wolf make for a better symbol than the messy reality of gradual development. But understanding Rome's true origins reveals something far more valuable: the actual formula that transformed a small settlement into history's most influential empire. Thanks for watching this hidden history of Rome's beginnings. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind the myths, Epiven has plenty more untold stories waiting for you. Remember, history isn't what they taught you in school. It's way more interesting. Hit subscribe for more hidden history that explains our world today.